I will be slowly starting, I think. Good afternoon again. My name is Magdalena Góra. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science and European Studies at the Jagiellonian University, and a member of a board of the Respublika Foundation and the publisher of Visegrad Insight, the hosting organization for this wonderful event. We have at the moment almost all of our panel. We still wait for one of the experts to join us. Before we'll give Matthew Karnicznik a few more minutes to join us. In the meantime, I would like to advertise that this meeting, the State of Germany, is a 3-day long initiative. So today we will have a chance to discuss very well located in a time just after the German elections, the democratic security. But tomorrow you can still register for our events about economic security. And on Thursday, there will be one about the military security of Germany. The link will be shared in chat. So if you did not register, please do at the moment. In addition to this, I would like to stress that the first approximately half an hour of our discussions is going to be recorded. And then the second part will be off the record Q&A with our wonderful speakers. And you can send your questions in the chat during the discussion, but it also is going to be wonderful if you can speak to us. I will be helping to navigate that part as well. I think we will start. Oh, wonderful. I think very, very well in point. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, sorry for my tardiness.
No problem. I was just providing some background information and some technical information about our series of events. So again, welcome to the event, and we are starting. So I will first introduce our speakers. Warm welcome to Alexandra Giese. She has been a member of European Parliament since 2019 and is the digital expert for the Greens EFA parliamentary group. She negotiated the extensive Digital Service Act, which is one of the most important points in our discussions about democratic security. It regulates digital platforms and social networks, or it shall. She is a member of European Democracy Shield Committee in the European Parliament, a very new initiative that we hope also to hear a little bit maybe in the context of our discussions today. Welcome, Alexandra. Thank you very much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hear your insights. We have Matthew Karnicznik, who recently joined Euractiv as editor-in-chief. Based in Brussels, which it seems we can see as well a little bit. Prior to his role, he was Politico's chief Europe correspondent based in Berlin. He joined Politico Europe as it launched in 2015 from the Wall Street Journal, where he spent 15 years in various roles as reporter and editor in both the US and Europe. So Matthew, we are looking forward to hear from your journalistic experience to our discussions. And last but not least, Tobias Spory. He was formerly a visiting fellow at German Marshall Fund. In addition to his fellowship, Tobias is currently a senior research fellow at DPART, that we didn't check how do I pronounce properly the name, a Berlin-based think tank for political participation and democracy. He is also a visiting professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Vienna, and a scientific advisor of the European Capital of Democracy project, which is a super cool initiative, and we all encourage you to check this project. And his research focuses on transformation of democracy, political participation, and European politics. With this stellar panel, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna discuss the results of German elections, something that I guess all of our audience is thinking about since Sunday. there is a lot of reflection needed on what has happened. But before we will deepen, I would like to start with the first question. And I would like to ask you for your first reflections and reactions to the results and possible scenarios for future German government, ruling coalition, but also the possible scenarios on the disruptive elements in the German politics coming from a very solid result by far-right opposition, Alternative für Deutschland. So I would like to maybe first we start with the order of presentation. So I would like to start I would like to ask Alexandra for her insights into where we are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good day to everybody, and thank you very much for the introduction. I think the first good news is that Germany will be able to have a stable government under the leadership of Friedrich Merz with the conservative Christian Democrats, very probably in a coalition with the Social Democrats, who have very quickly cleared the leadership question. So it will not be former Chancellor Olaf Scholz participating in the government, but the negotiations will be led by Lars Klingbeil. So I think there is some clarity. There is a clear power option. There's a clear government option. And I think these two parties are very aware of the responsibility that is on their shoulders right now in this extremely complicated global situation, that we have high urgency to have a functioning and stable German government. I think that is the good news. The bad news is, as you already said, that AfD scored above 20%. That is a stellar high record for Germany, and particular if you consider that AfD is the far-right party in Europe, probably most to the right, with extremely extreme elements like Maximilian Krah, for example, who was heavy allegations of cooperating with the Chinese secret service, taking money from Russia. Therefore, he was isolated after the European elections. And now he has been not only re-elected with an extremely high majority in his constituency, but he's also part of the parliamentary group now of AfD. So I think that is the risk, the explosive part in the future, because I think what people care about right now in Germany is quite a lot the economy, especially people who voted for the Christian Democrats and for Friedrich Merz. They want a stable, performing economy. I personally believe that the problems of the German economy right now are structural and will not be easy to solve, even with a different government. So the question is, where are we going to stand in a year from now? Because between 20 and 28%, the difference is not that big. I think that is dangerous. That's a dangerous part. We don't know what is going to happen around Ukraine. The world order is extremely unstable, and especially for the Christian Democrats, who have been traditionally very transatlantic, that is a huge challenge. So the conditions are very unstable. There's one thing that I would like to highlight, and that's the enormous success that was absolutely not foreseen until a week ago of the left. The left party scored more than 8% after polling around 3% a few months ago. When Sarah Wagenknecht decided to leave the party and build her own sort of nationalist party. Commentators are undecided whether it's rather leftist or whether rather far right. And unexpectedly, she didn't make it to the Bundestag. She didn't get over the 5% threshold, while the left performed extremely well. And we see that voters who voted for the left are extremely concerned about social justice, and about democracy and the stability of democracy, the rule of law as such. So let's see where this goes. I think we will have a stable government, but we don't know how long it's going to last. Friedrich Merz has already shown a couple of weeks before the elections that he decided to pass a resolution in the German government with the support of AfD, which led to big demonstrations and a lot of protest in Germany, but didn't really do anything to the polls. I think it didn't change the electoral outcome that much. But there are concerns around the stability of that future government in case things did go badly and AfD would further rise. So maybe I stop here for the moment.
Thank you very much, Matthew. The torch is going to you for your reactions.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I would like to key off of what Alexandra Geza just said, because I think it's an interesting viewpoint, and I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate here, because I think what she's saying is what we would call in German Wunschdenken, which means wishful thinking. If we look at just what's happened over the last 24 hours, and Alexandra mentioned Lars Klingbeil, who's an interesting figure. He's currently the co-leader of the Social Democrats in Germany. And I think this story I'm going to tell is sort of indicative of where Germany's political culture is at the moment. Now, the Social Democrats in Germany, as some of you might know, are the oldest political party, not just in Germany, but in Europe. They were founded around 1860. And this was really the only party in Germany that stood up in any meaningful way to the Nazis in 1933, to the point that they were members of the German Bundestag at the time, of the Reichstag at the time, giving speeches in the parliamentary chamber there, were surrounded by brown shirts and then carted off to prison after the takeover by Hitler. It's also the party that Alexandra's party, the Greens, basically broke off of in the 1970s. So the Social Democrats are, in many respects, the bulwark of German democracy, I would say, even if I don't agree with all of their policies necessarily. So it's interesting that their current leader, Lars Klingbeil, who was also responsible for their campaign, is not only going to remain in a leadership position, but he is apparently, and they're going to vote on it, I think today or tomorrow, become the new leader of the SPD parliamentary group, which will put him in a very powerful position, assuming that there's going to be a grand coalition, so-called grand coalition, which obviously might not be as grand as the grand coalitions of the past. And not only is he going to have that role, but he's apparently going to lead the negotiations with Friedrich Merz over this coalition and the coalition agreement. Now, I think in the past, there wouldn't have been any question that the person responsible, not just the leader, but the person who ran the campaign, was responsible for the strategy of a failed election campaign, would resign on the evening of the election. And remember, this is the worst result the SPD has recorded since basically ever, since 1890, I think, technically. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the entire political culture in Germany is in a deep crisis. And the reason that Klingbeil is staying is because the SPD really doesn't have anybody else. Normally you would have a long bench of people who could step in, and he would step aside, and somebody else would pick up the torch, as you call it. In this case, there's a torch burning on the ground, and there's nobody there to pick it up. So this is a huge problem in not just the SPD, I find, but also in the other establishment parties. So if we look to the CDU, to the presumptive new chancellor, and I happened to write about this last night, because I think it's very interesting that there's all of these expectations about Friedrich Merz all of a sudden. Friedrich Merz has wanted to be chancellor and has wanted to lead the CDU for most of his, if not all of his, adult life. And I've argued that there was a reason that he failed in this until a couple of years ago. And if some of you might remember, he was a rival of Angela Merkel's around 2000, when they were both much younger and both vying for leadership positions in the CDU after the Kohl era, as the Kohl era was ending. And Merz lost out then. And there was a reason he lost out. And it was probably good for the CDU that he did lose out. And then he went off and became a corporate lawyer, and everybody thought that they'd seen the last of Friedrich Merz until he came back again at the end of the Merkel era to try and take over the party again. And he failed in 2018 to do so. He lost the party election then to a woman named Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, whom some of you might remember. And then he lost a couple of years later to Armin Laschet. And then on his third try in 2021, when the party was really at a low point and they didn't have anybody to pick up the torch, they finally, they decided they were going to give it to him. So why is Friedrich Merz problematic in my view? And again, this isn't at all ideological. I'm just looking at the facts. And those of you who have spent any time in Germany or know Germans, you know how important qualifications are in Germany and in the German-speaking world. To be a baker, you need to have what's called a Meisterbrief, or to be a plumber, it takes years to do this. And normally, in the tradition of German politics, to be a chancellor, you need to have had really deep experience as an elected official at the highest levels, at least especially in the regions, as a minister president of a regional body, be it in North Rhine-Westphalia or Lower Saxony or wherever, or as mayor of Hamburg, which Olaf Scholz was, where you could argue, I guess, after Olaf Scholz, that maybe having this experience is not a good thing. In any case, every chancellor Germany has ever had has at least served as a minister. And the biggest organization Merz has ever run has been the CDU itself. And he's only done that for the past 2 years. So to think that he's going to step in at the age of almost 70 without any real experience of running something beyond his political party, I think is a little bit unrealistic. So I don't think that there's going to be stability in Germany. I think that Merz is a loose cannon, and I think that we saw this on Sunday in his first remarks after the election, where out of the blue on live television, he starts talking about, he was more musing about whether or not NATO would still exist by June because of everything that's going on in the United States. And he starts talking about, maybe we need to have our own defense pillar, and we're going to extract ourselves step by step from the United States and this type of thing. Now, these are important debates, but this is not the place for them. I think most people would argue during a live television show with the other candidates, you ran against in the election. And it just shows that his instincts, he doesn't have the kind of statesman-like instincts, I think, that somebody in this position would normally have. So I think Germany is facing a very rocky road. I think the results of the election show that the fringes are obviously resurgent on the left and on the right. And even though the one party, the Sarah Wagenknecht party, didn't make it into the Bundestag because it didn't reach the 5%, it missed it by 13,500 votes, I think. It got 4.97% of the vote. So if you add the left party, which got 9%, with the roughly 5% that this party got, you're at 14%. And then you've got the far right AfD at 20%. So over a third of Germans now are voting for radical parties, either on the right or the left. And that should make us all a bit nervous, especially because you can see very clearly that there is a deep crisis in these establishment parties. And I would include the Greens in that as well, which tried to pursue a more centrist strategy in this election. That didn't work out for them. And so now all of the sort of democratic parties of the center are, they're in crisis, and it's not really clear where this is going to lead. And just one last point is that given the disaster of the past several years, as reflected by the performance of the German economy, as reflected by public views of the government. This was the least liked government, I think, in modern German history, and at least since World War II. You would think that the main opposition party, in this case, the CDU, would be able to get more than 28.5%. I mean, this is a real failure of the CDU. In the last election in 2021, they were at 24%. So they've gone from 24% to 28.5%. This is not a big success. They should have been well over 30%, given where the German economy is. It's been stagnating for 5 years. It's been in recession for 2. Unemployment is rising. This would be normally a one in a lifetime opportunity for an opposition party, and yet they didn't even get over 30%. And I think that tells you everything that you need to know about the state of Germany's political establishment at the moment. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for the very thorough but sober assessment. Tobias, to you, what's your assessment? What's your key points?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good afternoon also from my side. I think I'm kind of between the two assessments we just heard of Alexandra and Matthew. I think in a way the elections didn't bring up any big surprises. I mean, also if you have followed the development of the opinion polls ahead, I think the only bigger surprise was that Die Linke had such a strong finish, especially among young voters. I think it's also important to talk about the very high turnout of 82.5%, like a 30-year record in turnout, which is also especially on down to the AfD, who were able to mobilize a lot of non-voters. I think in terms of political culture, I mean, it was quite clear that the traffic light coalition will go out. And if you look what happened to their 3 lead candidates, I mean, Olaf Scholz, Robert Habeck, and Christian Lindner, I mean, they all more or less resigned. So I think there is still a level of decency in German politics. And if you followed kind of the lead candidates round after the election, you could really see in the faces of especially Robert Habeck and Christian Lindner that they really had to devour this election result live on television. About Friedrich Merz, I kind of side with Matthew, but for a different reason. I think what is quite clear and obvious that Germany needs to step up, in both like in their domestic politics, but also in terms of foreign and security policies. And it's really down to Friedrich Merz. I mean, he seems to be quite eager to do so, but I think he will also struggle. One thing is certainly the constitutional debt break. I mean, as I've just read before the talk, the CDU offered to the SPD and the Greens to have another special budget of 200 billion euros for defense, approved by the outgoing Bundestag, which is also a bit problematic, you could say, in terms of democracy. I mean, you just vote and then you kind of use the outgoing parliament to do something very substantial reform very, very quickly. But what my main concern is about Friedrich Merz, that he's, he might want to be kind of this esteemed leader, but if you look at his approval ratings, especially among women, which obviously constitute 50%, like some 50% of German society, I think his ratings are quite bad. And if you look also in public opinion data, how kind of public mood is in Germany, which is extremely pessimistic. The AfD was also quite successful to put forward this narrative of decline. But and we have done a ton of research on this, I mean, people are fed up with the crisis. They are very pessimistic about the future, for instance, in terms of the development of the living standard in Germany. They are also kind of seeing that things are crumbling in Germany, like literally crumbling. Bridges, I mean, we don't have to talk about German railway. We do a lot of focus group research, so we talk to people. People tell us that they have to go to the schools of their kids to paint the walls in their free time and so on. So there is some, it's not just this narrative of decline coming from the AfD. This is also matched by some real life experiences. And And in order to turn kind of this German pessimism into something more optimistic, I think you need to have a proper vision where to lead Germany. And if you look at the electoral campaign, I mean, basically the CDU, I mean, they said a lot of things, but they also said basically we do also things on migration. I mean, Alexander was already mentioning the decision in the German Bundestag at the end of January. So we kind of more or less side with the AfD in some regard. And the other parties, I think they also kind of failed to come up with this positive, compelling vision. I mean, I think it's not enough just to say don't vote for the AfD because it's bad. So I think it's really the time to come up with a vision that also connects the domestic challenges and also the international challenges that are all around, which is not an easy task, but it's high time to tackle them properly.
Thank you very much. Our time for the sort of public recorded part is running out, but I would like to ask one more question and ask you for fairly concise answers, and then we will develop that in the sort of Q&A part. And it's about democratic security, really. So we'll push some of the questions towards the second part, but I would, you know, the EU and many member states putting electoral interference high on the agenda threats, right? Or the agenda of threats for democracies. And it is, of course, as we all know, usually perceived as perpetrated by the adversaries. But this time in the German case, we also had this sort of allied interference, if you wish, by the new administration in the US. And my question to all of you is first, you know, what really was the impact of such external sort of interference or sort of types of impact on German elections, and if there is a lesson that the German experience, which actually was the very first elections after the new administration in Washington, what can we basically learn for the EU and other member states to shield democracy? I would like to ask you for fairly concise reactions to this. Matthew, can I ask you first?
Sorry, if I understood you correctly, it's what we can do to shield the EU from the threat to democracy
And
in the wake.
Learn from the German, and if there was any impact, really.
Right. Look, I mean, I think as we just heard from Tobias, the fact that 83% of Germans went to vote is clearly a very positive sign. It shows that people are engaged. That's the most voters we've seen in Germany since reunification. So at the same time that we're all concerned about the future of democracy, people are responding to these political debates. They're not passive. They are going out and demonstrating all over Germany, all over Europe about whatever the issue is. So I think that despite all of the concerns that we have, which, you know, are real and legitimate, especially given everything that's happening, you know, with social media, and especially the American social media in Europe and the influence it has and the way that it's being used in elections, as we saw in Romania and probably in Germany, and we don't even know yet to the degree to which the Russians, for example, were probably trying to manipulate things in Germany. I think that I'm less worried about the democratic future. I'm worried about the radicalization on the fringes, certainly. But I think that we can all see now that it is necessary to respond to voter concerns, and we can't pretend that, you know, these issues that keep popping up again and again, year after year, in polls and you know, in voter surveys, whether it's about migration or inflation, that we have to take them seriously, because if we don't, voters are going to flee to the fringes. And I thought, just one last point, I thought it was very interesting that in his final appearance before Sunday, the kind of closure of the CDU campaign, Merz declared very triumphantly that the left in Germany was basically dead. which I think he was proven wrong less than 24 hours later. So it does show that democracy is very vibrant, both on the left and the right, but we need to really be aware that things could drift into the extremes if the center doesn't start addressing voters' main concerns.
Thank you very much. Tobias, to you. I'll put Alexandra last on this question since she performs functions on those issues.
Yeah, very briefly. I think we've seen like some more hidden forms of electoral interference and some more very open ones. I mean, if you saw the fake videos coming from Russia, from Leipzig or Hamburg, where like ballots are either destroyed because people voted for the AfD, or the AfD was not on the ballot anymore. I mean, fake videos. I think it's quite clear that you have this more subtle form of electoral interference. And then obviously there's Elon Musk. I think it has become quite of his hobby to show up at AfD party conventions, do some very strange interviews or conversations with Alice Weidel discussing strange things. I mean, we kind of all have followed this. I think about the impact, it's quite difficult to quantify. I mean, at least I haven't seen any data on this. I think it's also under research, to be frank, in Germany, how people see and perceive this interference from abroad, also hybrid warfare. But this is just a side note. I think what is my concern is that, I mean, especially in comparison to countries like in Poland or the Baltics, the German society is quite ill-prepared and unaware of that those things are happening. I mean, it's reported on the news, but it's not really part of the discussion. I mean, I've also been in touch with ministries, and they also struggle in terms of their communication of those things, because you don't want to appear weak, but you also don't want to not talk about this. So I think there's a lot of space for improvement. About the impact, I mean, all those things that have been happening, I mean, people like Musk wouldn't do it if they would not expect any gains from this. And last point, I think it has become quite clear. And I mean, there's also a lot of stuff happening at the EU level. I mean, if you look at all the platforms, I mean, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and so on, I mean, they're in the hands of private companies. And I mean, what you can see is if the owner radicalizes, like Musk in the last month, I mean, there's something in a way rotten in the system, if you can really see that he sides with one person or one party in particular. So the question is, how can the EU react to this? And I think this is the good way to hand over to Alexandra.
Indeed. Alexandra?
Yes, very, very happy. I have a solution, so don't worry. Just need to convince the Commission to apply it. Just to come in, I think there is a high impact of interference from both sides, Russian interference and US interference. And in fact, my initial remarks about the stability have to be seen a little bit behind that backdrop, that I could also imagine a much more unstable Germany, considering the enormous interference that we have and the digital environment people form their political opinions in. And I do agree with many of Matthew's comments on Friedrich Merz and how difficult this is going to be. But I still think that considering the amount of interference that I'm seeing, this is a decent outcome. How did that interference happen? I think Russian interference, I mean, that is discussed in Germany a lot less than it should be, but there were a lot of hybrid campaigns for the German-speaking, the Bauschaum thing, for example, very concretely campaigns on the ground to make that's especially against the Greens, and it has been not as successful as the Russians would have liked it to be, because we're still holding up around 11%, but it's clearly far below what we would like to be. I think the main problem is not so much Elon Musk specifically supporting one party or speaking to Alice Weidel. The main problem is the algorithmic distortion of the whole communication. And there was a study last week where you can clearly see that compared to the number of tweets party members or campaigners write, AfD, BSW, that's Sarah Wagenknecht, so rather close to Russia, to Putin, and CSU, which is the part of the Christian Democrats from Bavaria, who are a lot more populist and radical than the CDU, the party of Friedrich Merz, but otherwise they form some sort of strange twin system in the German party system. They get an enormous boost on X. And the Linke, the left, also gets a small boost, which we don't exactly know where that comes from, but it's inexplicable. And it's not only, it cannot only be explained with the fact that usually very spectacular tweets, very brutal tweets, extremist tweets, and tweets who lie get more engagement and therefore more visibility. While we see that Greens and Social Democrats were really suppressed. Like Social Democrats, they needed 10 tweets to get one into people's timeline, and the Greens 5 to get one into the timeline. And that's a very, very clear distortion, because if you're not even seen, there's no way you can communicate. And that's the problem with the positive vision, because some parties like my own, I think, have a positive vision. The problem is you get zero visibility with the positive vision because nobody's interested, because that's the kind of content that is suppressed by the algorithmic management, by the algorithms on X, on TikTok, and also on Facebook, on Meta platforms. And that is the real problem, that if you have a moderate, centrist, and positive message, you don't get visibility. And if you don't have visibility in social media, you don't have visibility in traditional media, because they have to follow the same kind of pattern right now. 40% of content in that study, but it's usually confirmed by any study. It always depends a little bit on the research design, says that 40% of the content of a timeline of an account, a sock puppet account, so an account that was set up, 2 accounts set up following around 500 German political accounts from all parties, 40% of that timeline was AfD content, 40%, 40. So that is foreign interference in some way. And therefore, you know, it's still positive that rather centrist, even if I don't like it, and for me it's much more to the right, still party can still win in that kind of environment. So what do we need to do? We need to change that kind of environment. You know, that is really suppression of particular political opinions, and it is interference. What we could do is use the Digital Services Act, which was already mentioned before, which has a provision that says if there are systemic risks for public discourse and electoral processes, which means basically systemic risk for democracy, and I think we can argue that we have risks if centrist progressive opinions are suppressed on X and other platforms. And we have seen that in Romania, an election was annulled, was cancelled, has to be repeated. So there is a systemic risk. Then the Commission can adopt mitigating measures. So I think if, as every study shows, disinformation is disseminated quicker and to more people and more visible than information, than facts, then you have a systemic risk to democracy. No democracy can function if you have an information system that promotes lies over facts, and that automatically gives lying politicians and lying media or influences over media a boost. So that can work. So we should use that Article 34 of the DSA to conduct a thorough investigation on the mechanisms which have that effect to disseminate disinformation quicker than information. And that's different things. It's engagement-based ranking, it's bot networks. It could be Elon Musk meddling with the system. We don't know. We don't have proof because nobody can investigate this except from the European Commission. And then change those mechanisms. You know, not take the disinformation down because that's freedom of expression and we shouldn't touch that, but change that mechanisms and recreate a level playing field for facts and for all political opinions. That would be the solution, to give everybody a fair chance to compete. This is exactly what we do in classic media, more or less. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's getting interesting. I can already see that we have the panel responses, but I would like, Matthew, before I will let you do, we are finishing the recorded part of this meeting